The cough started on a Tuesday morning, deep and rattling in my chest like autumn leaves caught in a storm drain. I stood at my kitchen window, watching the neighbor's dog scratch at something in the dirt, and felt the familiar ache settle into my bones, not just from whatever virus had found me, but from the hollow certainty that I would weather this alone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. At 62, I had grown accustomed to solitude, but illness has a way of stripping away the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about independence. The fever arrived that evening, and with it, a vulnerability I hadn't felt since Ansel died 3 years ago. My hands shook as I reached for the phone. "I think I'm getting sick," I told Bella when she finally answered on the 4th ring. My voice came out smaller than I intended, cracked around the edges. "Could you stay with me for a few days?" The pause stretched long enough for me to hear her television in the background. Some reality show with people screaming at each other. How fitting. "Mom, I'm really swamped at work right now," she said, and I could picture her already mentally cataloging the inconvenience of my request. "Maybe take some Dayquil and rest up? You'll be fine." I moved slowly through my small house that night, each step deliberate, exaggerated. Part of me hoped she might call back, having remembered some maternal instinct buried beneath her busy schedule. The other part, the part that had been growing stronger and more cynical with each passing disappointment, knew better. The next morning brought a bag of Thai takeout on my doorstep and a text message. "Busy today. Feel better soon. No call. No check-in. Just dismissal," wrapped in the thinnest veneer of concern. I stared at the plastic containers through my fever haze, pad thai growing cold in the October air, and something fundamental shifted inside me. Not the sharp crack of a breaking heart. I had weathered those storms years ago, but something deeper and more final, like a foundation settling, accepting that the weight it had been carrying was never meant to be borne alone. For 3 days, I drifted through my illness in solitude. I made my own soup, checked my own temperature, and listened to my own labored breathing echo in rooms that suddenly felt too large and too empty. But instead of self-pity, I found myself taking inventory. When had I become so expendable? The answer came in fragments, like remembering a dream. Years of making myself smaller to accommodate Bella's growing resentment after her father's death. Months of swallowing my own needs when she complained about her job, her marriage, her children who barely acknowledged my existence. Decades of being the reliable constant while everyone else moved forward with their lives, taking my presence for granted like electricity or running water. By Friday, my fever had broken, but something else had crystallized in its place. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold between my palms and made a decision that would have terrified me a week earlier. I was going to disappear. Not dramatically, that wasn't my style. No angry confrontations or tear-soaked ultimatums. Just a quiet, deliberate withdrawal from a life that had apparently been functioning perfectly well without my active participation. The rural property had been sitting empty since Ansel's mother passed 5 years ago. 40 acres of rolling hills and oak trees an hour outside the city, with a small farmhouse that needed work but had good bones. Bella had always dismissed it as that old place, too far from civilization to be practical. Perfect. I spent the weekend researching moving companies and storage units, my energy returning with each decision. There was something intoxicating about planning in secret, about reclaiming agency over my own life, without requiring anyone's permission or approval. Monday morning, I called a real estate agent about renting out my house. By Tuesday, I had hired cleaners and contractors. By Wednesday, the moving truck was scheduled. "Where are you going?" my neighbor Mrs. Catherine asked when she saw the boxes piling up on my porch. "Somewhere I can breathe," I told her, and realized it was the most honest thing I'd said in months. I didn't tell Bella, didn't call my sister in Phoenix or my handful of remaining friends. This metamorphosis required solitude, the kind of deep quiet that only comes when you stop performing for an audience that isn't really watching anyway. The farmhouse smelled like dust and memories when I first walked through it with my suitcases. The floors creaked, the windows stuck, and the kitchen hadn't been updated since the 1970s. But sunlight streamed through the front windows in golden rectangles, and I could hear birds instead of traffic. For the first time in years, I smiled without forcing it. That first night, I sat on the front porch with a glass of wine and my laptop, researching online courses. Digital marketing, web design, social media management, skills that had seemed impossibly foreign just weeks ago now, felt like doorways to a future I could build entirely on my own terms. The silence of my phone was no longer painful, but purposeful. Every hour that passed without a call or text from Bella was another hour I could invest in becoming someone new. Someone who didn't wait by the phone or make excuses for other people's cruelty disguised as busyness. I enrolled in 3 courses that night, my credit card information typed with steady fingers. The woman who had begged for scraps of attention was evolving into someone who generated her own worth. By the end of the first week, I had established a routine that felt both foreign and essential. Morning coffee on the porch, watching deer move through the oak trees, hours spent learning about conversion rates and content strategies, my mind absorbing information with a hunger I hadn't felt since college. Afternoon walks along the property lines, my body growing stronger with each passing day. The evenings were for planning. I drafted business proposals and designed mock websites, teaching myself skills that would have seemed impossible a month ago. But isolation, I discovered, was an excellent teacher. Without the constant interruption of other people's needs and expectations, I could focus entirely on my own potential. 3 weeks into my new life, my phone finally rang. Bella's name appeared on the screen, and I stared at it for several rings before answering. "Mom, where are you? I went by your house and there's a for rent sign in the yard." Her voice carried an edge of panic that might have softened me once upon a time. Now, it simply sounded like someone finally noticing that the foundation had shifted. "I moved," I said simply. "Moved where? Why didn't you tell me?" I looked out at the oak trees, their leaves beginning to turn gold in the afternoon light. "I'm discovering I don't need permission to make decisions about my own life." The silence stretched between us, loaded with all the conversations we should have had years ago. "Mom, this is crazy. You can't just disappear without telling anyone." "Can't I?" I asked, and heard the strength in my own voice. "Seems like I already have." What she said next would determine everything. "You're being ridiculous, Mom. Come home. We can talk about this like adults." The presumption in Bella's voice, that she could simply command my return like calling a wayward pet, crystallized every reason I had left. I set my coffee cup down on the porch railing with deliberate care, watching steam rise in the cool morning air. "This is my home now," I said. "That falling down farmhouse? Mom, you're 62, not 22. You can't just run away because your feelings got hurt." Feelings got hurt. As if 3 days of feverish solitude while she delivered takeout like I was a charity case could be reduced to something so trivial. The casual dismissal in her tone told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation would unfold. "I'm not running away, Bella. I'm running toward something." "Toward what? Isolation? You'll be miserable out there." I looked across the rolling hills where morning mist clung to the oak trees like promises. In the 6 weeks since I'd moved here, I had launched a consulting business that was already generating modest income. 3 clients sought my advice on digital marketing strategies, and 2 more had inquired about my services after seeing the professional website I'd built from scratch. Every skill I'd learned felt like reclaiming territory that had been surrendered years ago. "I'm quite content," I said. "Content?" Bella's laugh held no warmth. "Living like a hermit? Mom, this is just another one of your phases. Remember when you wanted to learn pottery after Dad died? Or that ridiculous book club phase?" Each dismissal was a small violence, designed to remind me of my place in her narrative. The grieving widow who dabbled in hobbies. The aging mother whose interests were phases to be tolerated rather than supported. "Those weren't phases," I said quietly. "They were attempts to find meaning after your father's death. Attempts you consistently mocked." "I didn't mock. You called the pottery class playing in mud. You said book club was for lonely housewives with nothing better to do." The silence stretched long enough for me to hear her breathing change, becoming shallower, more defensive. "Look, if you're having some kind of breakdown, I'm having a breakthrough. Mom, please, just come home. I'll visit more often, I promise. We can have dinner once a week or something. Once a week or something." The casual way she tossed out minimal effort like it was generous sacrifice made my chest tighten with something darker than disappointment. This was the pattern. My pain became her inconvenience. My needs became negotiations she entered reluctantly. "I think we're done here," I said. "Don't hang up on me." But I did. The silence that followed felt like the first full breath I'd taken in years. Over the next month, the calls came sporadically. Sometimes apologetic, sometimes manipulative, occasionally threatening. Bella enlisted her husband Dylan to call and explain how worried they were. She had my sister Millie call from Phoenix to suggest I might be having some kind of episode. Each intervention felt more like an attempt to manage me than understand me. I stopped answering. My business grew quietly but steadily. Word of mouth brought new clients. Small business owners who needed someone who understood both traditional values and modern marketing. I charged fair rates and delivered exceptional work, building a reputation that existed entirely separate from my identity as anyone's mother or widow. The farmhouse transformed around me like a physical manifestation of my internal changes. I hired local contractors to update the kitchen and refinish the hardwood floors. I planted a garden that would bloom in spring. I bought furniture that pleased me rather than accommodating anyone else's taste. For the first time in decades, I lived in a space that reflected my own preferences rather than compromise. The loneliness I had expected never materialized. Instead, I discovered the profound peace of solitude, chosen rather than imposed. My days had rhythm and purpose. My evenings belonged entirely to me. The absence of obligation felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. 3 months into my new life, Millie called. "Sharon, I'm flying out next week. Bella is beside herself." "I'm sure she is. This has gone on long enough. Whatever fight you two had—" "We didn't have a fight," I interrupted. "I simply stopped participating in a relationship that had become entirely one-sided. She says you disappeared without warning. I moved. People move. It happens all the time. Not without telling their family." I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the vegetable garden where tomatoes were beginning to ripen. The physical act of nurturing something from seed to harvest had taught me patience I hadn't known I possessed. "Millie, when was the last time Bella called you just to see how you were doing?" "That's not—" "When was the last time she remembered your birthday without Facebook reminding her? When did she last offer to help you with anything without being asked?" The silence told me everything. "She's your daughter," Millie said finally, "and I'm her mother. That relationship requires effort from both people. She's trying now. She's panicking now. There's a difference." Millie sighed, and I could picture her in her Phoenix kitchen, probably wondering how this conversation had become so difficult. "Will you at least see her when I come out?" "No." The finality in my own voice surprised me. Months ago, I would have capitulated, agreed to a meeting that would inevitably become another opportunity for Bella to explain why my feelings were unreasonable and my expectations too high. "Sharon, Millie, I love you, but I'm not going to debate my right to set boundaries. If Bella wants a relationship with me, she knows where I am, but I'm not going to beg for scraps of affection anymore." After I hung up, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and watched the sun set behind the hills. My phone buzzed occasionally with text messages I didn't read. The silence felt like sanctuary. That night, I worked on a marketing proposal for a local winery, losing myself in the satisfying puzzle of demographics and messaging strategies. At 11, I closed my laptop and realized I hadn't thought about Bella or Millie or family drama for 4 straight hours. The revelation felt like victory. A week later, I was pruning roses when I heard a car engine on the gravel road. Through the oak trees, I could see Millie's rental car approaching, with Bella in the passenger seat. My stomach clenched briefly before settling into something resembling calm resignation. I didn't go inside to hide, didn't rush to change clothes or check my appearance. I simply continued pruning, letting them come to me in my own space, on my own terms. They parked near the front porch and sat in the car for several minutes, clearly strategizing. I focused on the roses, removing dead blooms with precise cuts, aware of their eyes on me, but refusing to acknowledge their presence until they made the first move. Finally, both car doors opened. Bella looked thinner than I remembered, her professional polish slightly frayed around the edges. Millie appeared travel-weary and uncertain. They approached slowly, like negotiators entering hostile territory. "Hello, Mom." I looked up from the roses, garden shears still in my hand, and felt nothing but mild curiosity about what performance they had prepared. Bella, Millie, can we talk? I gestured toward the porch chairs I had arranged for solitary evenings, but that would now serve a different purpose entirely. Of course. This is your first time seeing the property, isn't it? The casual deflection, treating this like a social visit rather than an intervention, seemed to throw them off balance. Bella glanced around at the restored farmhouse, the flourishing garden, the obvious signs of intentional living. It's different than I expected. Most transformations are. We settled into the chairs, and I waited. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable for them, which had always been the point. I had learned the power of not filling awkward spaces with nervous chatter. "Mom," Bella began, her voice carefully modulated. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The word hung in the air like smoke. A misunderstanding. As if my systematic withdrawal from a toxic dynamic was simply poor communication rather than deliberate self-preservation. I set the garden shears on the small table between us and looked directly at my daughter for the first time in months. What I saw in her eyes would change everything. What I saw wasn't remorse. It wasn't the dawning recognition of years of casual cruelty or the genuine desire to rebuild our relationship on healthier ground. What I saw was calculation. Bella's eyes held the focused intensity of someone working through a problem, measuring angles and outcomes. She was strategizing in real time, calibrating her approach based on my responses. The realization hit me with crystalline clarity. She hadn't come here to apologize or make amends. She had come here to manage me. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, her voice taking on the careful cadence of someone delivering a rehearsed speech, "about how we got to this place. And I realize I may have been insensitive to your needs after Dad died. May have been insensitive." Each phrase was a masterclass in non-apology, acknowledging just enough fault to seem reasonable while accepting no real responsibility. Millie shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly hoping this performance would satisfy me enough to restore some semblance of normal family function. The desire for peace at any cost radiated from her like heat. "Go on," I said simply. Bella glanced at Millie, drawing confidence from her audience. "I know I could have been more available when you were sick. Work has been incredibly demanding, but that's no excuse for not being there when you needed me." The words were perfectly crafted, reasonable, measured, designed to sound like genuine acknowledgement while revealing nothing about her true understanding of the situation. She was offering me the bare minimum of validation, expecting it to be enough to lure me back into familiar patterns. "What do you think I needed?" I asked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked, recalibrating again. "You needed support, someone to take care of you. And what did you give me instead?" I was overwhelmed. I should have handled it better. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a woman who had spent so many years taking my presence for granted that she had never bothered to truly see me. In her mind, I was a supporting character in her story, existing primarily to provide emotional labor and unconditional love without requiring much in return. The patronizing tone, the careful phrasing, the way she kept glancing at Millie for approval, it all confirmed what I had suspected during our phone calls. This wasn't about repairing our relationship. This was about returning me to a manageable role in her life. "Bella," I said, my voice steady, "do you know what I do for work now?" She frowned, clearly thrown by the change of subject. "You said something about consulting?" "Digital marketing consulting. I help small businesses develop online strategies to reach their target audiences." I gestured toward the laptop visible through the front window. "I have 6 regular clients and a waiting list. I'm booked solid through December." Millie looked genuinely surprised. Bella's expression remained carefully neutral, but I caught the flicker of something that might have been resentment. That's great, Mom. I'm happy you're staying busy." Staying busy. As if my professional success was a hobby to keep me occupied rather than a legitimate accomplishment. "I'm not staying busy," I said. "I'm building a career. At 62, I'm more professionally fulfilled than I've been in decades." "But surely you don't want to do this forever," Bella said. "It must be exhausting, learning all that technology stuff at your age." "At your age." The casual ageism was so embedded in her worldview that she delivered it without apparent awareness of the insult. I stood up slowly, watching both women track my movement. The physical act of rising above them felt symbolic in ways that probably weren't lost on any of us. "Would you like to see the house?" I asked. They followed me through rooms that had been transformed over the past 4 months. The kitchen gleamed with new appliances and fresh paint. The living room held furniture I had chosen specifically for my own comfort and aesthetic preferences. My office, formerly Ansel's mother's sewing room, contained a professional setup that rivaled any corporate workspace. "You've done so much work," Millie said, and I heard genuine admiration in her voice. Bella remained quiet, taking inventory with the same calculating expression she'd worn on the porch. When we reached my office, she paused at the framed certificates on the wall, digital marketing credentials I had earned through months of intensive study. "How much did all this cost?" she asked suddenly. The question revealed everything I needed to know about her priorities. "Less than you might think," I said. "I sold some of your father's equipment that was gathering dust in the garage. His tools, the boat he never used, that vintage motorcycle he was always going to restore." Bella's head snapped toward me. "You sold Dad's motorcycle?" "I sold items I owned that had no practical value to me, but those were Dad's things." They were my things, left to me, to do with as I saw fit." The color drained from Bella's face, and for the first time since they'd arrived, her composure cracked completely. "You should have asked me first. Some of those things, they had sentimental value. To whom? To me. To the family." I walked to the window and looked out at the garden where I had planted herbs and vegetables with my own hands. The physical labor had been therapeutic in ways I hadn't expected. Each planted seed a small act of faith in my own future. "Bella, in the 3 years since your father died, how many times have you been to the house to spend time with his belongings?" Silence. "How many times have you asked to borrow something of his, or suggested we look through his things together?" More silence. "Those items sat untouched in the garage for 3 years while you built your own life. They had sentimental value only when I decided to transform them into something that actually served my needs. That's not the point." "What is the point?" I turned to face her, and something in my expression must have been sharper than I intended, because she took a small step backward. "The point is that you want to control how I grieve, how I heal, how I choose to rebuild my life. The point is that you're comfortable with me being lonely and struggling as long as I don't inconvenience you with my needs." Millie cleared her throat nervously. "Maybe we should all take a breath." "No," I said, my voice cutting through her attempt at mediation. "We shouldn't take a breath. We should finish this conversation." I looked directly at Bella, who was now visibly struggling to maintain her composure. "You came here today expecting to find a lonely, desperate woman who would be grateful for your attention. You prepared a speech designed to make me feel heard, without actually changing anything about how you treat me. You thought you could manage me back into a role that serves your needs without examining your own behavior. That's not," Bella began. "You asked how much all this cost," I continued, gesturing around the room. "The renovations, the furniture, the technology, the education, all of it cost less than what you spent on your kitchen remodel last year. The difference is that I invested in my own growth instead of impressing other people." Bella's face flushed red. "I never said anything about your choices being wrong. You didn't have to. Your shock at discovering I'm capable of independence says everything about how you viewed me for years." The silence that followed was different from the earlier quiet moments. This was the heavy stillness that comes when pretenses collapse, and everyone involved recognizes that a fundamental shift has occurred. Millie looked between us like someone watching a car accident in slow motion. Bella's breathing had become shallow, and her hands were clenched at her sides. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. "Fine. You want to know the truth? You're right. I came here thinking you were having some kind of breakdown. I thought you were acting out because you couldn't handle being alone. I thought—" She stopped herself, but the damage was already done. "You thought what?" Bella's composure finally shattered completely. "I thought you were pathetic." The word hung in the air like a physical blow. Millie gasped softly, but I felt nothing except a cold satisfaction at finally hearing the truth spoken aloud. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Mom, thank you for your honesty. It clarifies things considerably. Bella seemed to realize what she had revealed, and her face crumpled with something that might have been genuine regret or might have been panic at losing control of the narrative. I didn't mean— Yes, you did. And now we both know exactly where we stand. I walked back to the porch, leaving them to follow or not as they chose. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the oak trees, casting long shadows across the property that had become my sanctuary. Behind me, I could hear Millie's urgent whispers and Bella's muffled responses. They were undoubtedly trying to salvage a situation that had spiraled far beyond their expectations. I settled into my chair and waited. The next few minutes would determine whether this conversation ended with their departure or evolved into something even more revealing. What happened next would show me exactly who my daughter really was. They emerged from the house 15 minutes later, Bella's face blotchy from tears that I suspected were more about frustration than genuine remorse. Millie looked like someone who had witnessed a traffic accident and wasn't sure whether to call for help or pretend she hadn't seen anything. Bella approached my chair with the careful movements of someone testing thin ice. "Mom, I'm sorry. What I said was cruel and unfair. I was angry and I lashed out." I continued looking out at the oak trees where evening shadows were beginning to gather. The apology had the hollow ring of damage control, too practiced, too focused on her own emotional state rather than the impact of her words. "What exactly are you sorry for?" I asked without turning to look at her. For calling you pathetic, for not being more supportive, for not understanding what you were going through." Each item on her list felt like a checkbox being ticked off rather than genuine acknowledgement. She was sorry for the things that made her look bad, not for the years of systematic dismissal that had led to this moment. "And what are you not sorry for?" The question seemed to catch her off guard again. I could see her in my peripheral vision, glancing at Millie for guidance that wouldn't come. I don't understand. You're sorry for calling me pathetic, but are you sorry for thinking it? You're sorry for not being supportive when I was sick, but are you sorry for the years of taking my support for granted? You're sorry for not understanding what I was going through, but are you sorry for never bothering to ask? I finally turned to face her, and what I saw confirmed everything I needed to know. Her expression held the frustrated impatience of someone who had offered what she considered a reasonable concession and couldn't understand why it wasn't being accepted. "I'm trying to apologize here," she said, and there it was, the entitled irritation of someone who expected gratitude for the bare minimum effort. "No," I said quietly. "You're trying to manage the situation. There's a difference." Millie stepped forward, clearly desperate to mediate. "Sharon, maybe we could all just—" "Millie." My voice carried enough authority to stop her mid-sentence. "This conversation is between Bella and me." Bella's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it instinctively before catching herself. But the damage was done. Even now, in the middle of what she had supposedly come here to repair, she couldn't give me her full attention. "Is that important?" I asked. "No, it's just—" She stopped herself, but the reflexive checking of her phone had revealed more than any words could have. "Go ahead. Answer it." "Mom, no, this is more important." "Is it?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Bella's eyes darted to the phone again, and I could see her internal struggle. Whatever notification she had received was clearly pulling at her attention, even as she tried to convince me of my importance in her life. "Answer the phone, Bella." "I don't need to—" "Answer it." She picked up the phone with obvious reluctance. "It's just a work email about the Morrison project. I can deal with it later." "The Morrison project that's been keeping you so busy?" "Yes. The one that was so demanding it prevented you from spending a few days with your sick mother?" Her face went pale as she realized the trap she had walked into. "That was months ago. The situation is different now." "How is it different?" Because now I understand what I did wrong." "Do you?" I stood up slowly, and both women took an involuntary step backward. There was something about my movement, deliberate, controlled, final, that seemed to communicate more than words. "Bella, you've been here for 2 hours. In that time, you've checked your phone 4 times, expressed surprise that I'm professionally successful, questioned my financial decisions, and revealed that you fundamentally view me as pathetic. Your apology focused entirely on making yourself feel better, rather than understanding the impact of your behavior. That's not fair. And when your phone buzzed just now, your first instinct was to check it, even though you came here claiming I was your priority. Bella's mouth opened and closed like someone drowning in air. But here's what I find most interesting, I continued. You're not actually sorry for any of it. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry I didn't react the way you expected. You're sorry that managing me turned out to be more complicated than you anticipated. Mom, please. I spent 3 years after your father's death trying to figure out why I felt so alone, even though I had family. It took getting sick and being abandoned to understand that I had been alone all along. You just provided the illusion of connection when it was convenient for you. Millie finally found her voice. Sharon, you're being very harsh. Bella came all this way to try to fix things. I looked at my sister with something approaching pity. Millie, she came here to fix me, not fix things. There's a fundamental difference. What do you want from me? Bella's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine desperation, but I had learned not to trust the performance. I want nothing from you. The words came out with such finality that both women seemed to physically recoil. That's not true, Bella said quickly. Everyone wants something. What is it? Do you want me to visit more? Call more often? Include you in family events? The desperation in her voice was real now, but it wasn't about losing me. It was about losing control of the narrative. As long as I wanted something from her, she maintained power in the relationship. My complete withdrawal of need represented a fundamental threat to the dynamic she had spent years establishing. I want exactly what I have, I said. A life built entirely on my own terms, with people who value my presence rather than tolerate it. You're my mother. Of course I value. Bella. My voice cut through her protestations like a blade. Stop. Just stop. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have gone quiet in the oak trees. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to really hear it, I said. For the past 4 months, I have been happier and more fulfilled than I've been in years. My business is thriving. My home brings me joy. My days have purpose and meaning. I sleep well at night and wake up excited about the possibilities ahead of me. Bella's face was crumpling again, but this time the tears looked different, less manipulative, more genuinely panicked. I have built a life that doesn't require your approval, your attention, or your presence, and that terrifies you, doesn't it? You're my mother, she whispered. Yes, and you're my daughter. But that biological fact doesn't obligate me to accept mistreatment or settle for scraps of affection. I walked to the edge of the porch and looked out at the property that had become my sanctuary. The vegetable garden was producing more than I could eat alone. The roses I had pruned were blooming magnificently. Everything I had invested time and care in was flourishing. I forgive you, I said without turning around. Behind me, I heard Bella's sharp intake of breath, relief perhaps, or hope that this nightmare was finally ending. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, and it certainly doesn't mean returning to patterns that were slowly killing my spirit. What does that mean? Millie asked. I turned back to face them both. It means I forgive Bella for being exactly who she is. I don't expect her to change, and I'm not interested in trying to manage her into becoming someone different. But I also won't pretend that who she is fits into my life anymore. You're cutting me off? Bella's voice was barely audible. I'm setting you free, I said. Free from the obligation of pretending to care about a relationship you've never actually wanted. Free from the burden of managing a pathetic old woman who doesn't know her place. The cruelty in my words was precise and intentional, each phrase designed to reflect her own language back to her. And I'm setting myself free from the exhausting work of trying to earn love that was never actually available. Bella was openly sobbing now, and Millie looked stricken. You can't mean this, Millie said. I mean every word. My phone rang suddenly, cutting through the tension. I glanced at the screen and saw the name of a potential client I had been expecting to hear from. Excuse me, I said, and answered the call with perfect professional composure. Sharon speaking. Yes, I received your email about the campaign strategy. Tomorrow afternoon would be perfect. I look forward to our meeting. I ended the call and looked back at my daughter and sister, who were staring at me like I had become someone they didn't recognize. Perhaps I had. That was a new client, I said conversationally. A tech startup that needs help reaching an older demographic. Apparently, my age and experience are exactly what they're looking for. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. I think it's time for you both to go, I said, but Bella wasn't finished yet. What she said next would determine whether this ended with their quiet departure or something far more devastating. You think you're so much better than everyone else now, don't you? Bella's voice had transformed from desperation to something uglier, a bitter resentment that had apparently been simmering beneath her earlier attempts at reconciliation. The mask was finally coming off completely. All this, she gestured wildly at the house, the garden, the evidence of my rebuilt life, is just you trying to prove something. You're not happy. You're just stubborn and selfish. Millie reached toward her arm. Bella, don't. No! Bella shook her off. I'm tired of pretending. She wants honesty? Fine. You disappeared because you couldn't handle that Dad was gone, and the world didn't revolve around you anymore. You ran away like a child having a tantrum. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. This was who she really was when the pretense fell away. Not the calculating manipulator trying to manage me back into line, but someone whose resentment ran so deep it had poisoned any possibility of genuine connection. Keep going, I said quietly. You want to play the victim? But you know what? You were never that good of a mother anyway. Dad did most of the emotional work in our family. You were always too wrapped up in your own drama to really pay attention to what I needed. Each word was designed to wound, to tear down the foundation of my identity as a parent. But instead of devastation, I felt a strange kind of liberation. She was finally saying what she had been thinking for years, and it revealed more about her character than mine. Is that all? I asked. You think this little performance proves you're independent? You're 62 years old, living alone in the middle of nowhere, pretending to be some kind of businesswoman. It's pathetic. There was that word again. Pathetic. But this time it carried the full weight of her contempt, delivered not in a moment of anger, but as a fundamental judgment about who I was. And you know what's really sick? She continued, her voice rising. Part of you is probably enjoying this. You get to be the martyred mother, abandoned by her ungrateful daughter. It gives you an excuse to wallow in self-pity and act like the world owes you something. Millie was staring at her daughter with growing horror, but I found myself oddly calm. This volcanic eruption of resentment was actually a gift. It removed any possibility of doubt about my decisions. Are you finished? I asked. Bella seemed to deflate slightly, as if the force of her anger had temporarily exhausted her. I'm finished pretending this is my fault. I nodded slowly and walked to the small table where I had left my laptop that morning. I opened it, clicked through a few screens, and found what I was looking for. Bella, do you know what this is? She looked at the screen with suspicion. It looks like some kind of legal document. It's my will, updated last month with my attorney. I scrolled through the pages slowly, letting her see the official letterhead, the legal language, the signatures and notarizations that made it binding. I don't want to hear about your will. You should, I interrupted, because it concerns you directly. Millie moved closer, her face pale. Sharon, what are you doing? I'm providing clarity, I said. Bella seems to think my life here is temporary, that this independence is some kind of phase I'll grow out of. She believes I'll eventually come crawling back, desperate for whatever scraps of relationship she's willing to offer. I turned the laptop so they could both see the screen clearly. This document ensures that won't happen. Everything I own, this property, the house in town that I'm renting out, my business assets, my retirement accounts, all of it, goes to organizations that serve women rebuilding their lives after loss or abuse. Bella's face went white. What? The women's shelter where I've been volunteering gets the main house and property. They'll use it as a transitional residence for women escaping domestic violence. My business assets go to a nonprofit that provides digital literacy training for older women entering the workforce. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. I scrolled to another section. There's a small provision for Millie, because she's been a genuine sister to me over the years, even when she didn't understand my choices. But for you, Bella, there's just this. I pointed to a single line of text. To my daughter Bella, who taught me that blood relation is not the same as family, I leave the certain knowledge that she is capable of building her own life without depending on anyone else's foundation. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the wind moving through the oak trees. "You're disinheriting me," Bella whispered. "I'm freeing you," I corrected. "You've made it very clear that you see my life, my needs, and my emotions as burdens to be managed rather than relationships to be cherished. This ensures you'll never have to pretend otherwise again. But the house, Dad's things, our family history, will go to people who understand the value of home and security because they've lived without it." I closed the laptop with deliberate finality. Women who know what it means to rebuild from nothing, to find strength they didn't know they possessed, to create families based on choice rather than obligation. Bella was hyperventilating now, and Millie looked like she might be sick. "You can't do this out of spite," Bella gasped. "I'm not doing it out of spite," I said calmly. "I'm doing it out of clarity. For 3 years after your father's death, I tried to maintain a relationship with you based on shared history and biological connection. But you've shown me repeatedly that those bonds mean nothing without mutual respect and genuine care." I stood up and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the land that had become my sanctuary. "You called me pathetic twice today, Bella. The first time in anger, the second time as a fundamental assessment of who I am. Both times you were wrong. A pathetic person would beg for your approval, would apologize for inconveniencing you with her needs, would accept whatever minimal effort you were willing to provide." I turned back to face them both. A strong person recognizes when a relationship has become toxic and has the courage to walk away, even when that relationship is with her own child. "Mom, please," Bella's voice cracked, but I could see the calculation returning to her eyes even through the tears. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. "We can work this out." "No, we can't." The finality in my voice seemed to hit her like a physical blow. "Because working it out would require you to genuinely change how you see me and treat me. And we both know that's not going to happen. You apologized earlier for calling me pathetic, but within an hour you called me pathetic again. You can't help yourself." Millie finally found her voice. "Sharon, this is extreme. She's your daughter. And I'm her mother. That should have meant something to her before it became convenient." I walked back inside the house, leaving them on the porch. Through the window, I could see them having an urgent, whispered conversation. Bella was gesturing frantically while Millie shook her head repeatedly. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had made the decision to disappear 4 months ago. Everything that had happened since then, the move, the business, the renovation, the careful construction of a life that belonged entirely to me, had led to this moment. When I returned to the porch, they were both standing by Millie's rental car. Bella's face was streaked with tears, but her posture radiated anger rather than remorse. "This isn't over," she said. "Yes, it is. You can't just cut me out of your life. I can, and I have. What about holidays? Family gatherings? What am I supposed to tell people?" The questions revealed everything about her priorities. Even now, her primary concern was managing appearances rather than understanding the relationship we had lost. "Tell them whatever you'd like," I said. "Tell them your pathetic mother finally learned to value herself. Tell them I chose my own happiness over your convenience. Tell them I discovered that family is something you build, not something you're born into." I walked back toward the house, then paused at the door. "Millie, you're welcome here anytime. You've been a true sister, and that means something to me." Then I looked at Bella one final time. "Goodbye, Bella." I went inside and closed the door, turning the deadbolt with a sound that seemed to echo through the house. Through the window, I watched them drive away, Millie's car disappearing through the oak trees that had witnessed my transformation. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. My phone buzzed with a text from the tech startup client. "Looking forward to our meeting tomorrow. Your preliminary ideas were exactly what we needed." I smiled and began preparing for the evening. There was a bottle of wine that needed opening, a book that needed reading, and a life that needed living, entirely on my own terms. The foundation had held, and it was stronger than ever.